Hey everybody, KC here. So I'm really excited about today's Morning Newsbeat conversation because it's with Stu Upson, who is the CEO of USA Pickleball. Yeah, not a retailer, not even close to being a retailer, but I just thought this could be a really interesting conversation because pickleball has just grown so much in the last couple of years. I mean, it's got to be the fastest growing participatory sport in the country at this point. And I'll be really upfront with you. I've known Stu for almost 40 years, and I thought he would have a lot to bring to a conversation about how to grow a brand like pickleball, but also the through line on some of his other experiences. Because at various times in Stu's career, he's worked for Major League Baseball, he's worked for USA Bowling, he's worked for the Tennis Hall of Fame, and Skip Barber Racing. So he's had a lot of really interesting sports-related experience, but all dealing with really interesting brands that were at various different stages in their growth. So I reached out to him. He agreed to do it. I hope you enjoy my conversation with the CEO of USA Pickleball, Stu Upson. Well, Stu Upson, welcome to Morning Newsbeat. I'm so glad you're doing this.
Kevin, glad to be here. It's going to be a lot of fun.
So I have to be honest, and I've explained to the audience that I've known you for almost 40 years, which is amazing all by itself. I had never heard of pickleball before you became CEO of USA Pickleball. Laura had heard of it, but had never played it. Now she's become like she's addicted to it. And she's got a little pickleball group that she goes out and plays with once or twice a week. And it's like amazing. Took lessons and the whole thing. So it's clearly based on everything I'm reading, it's got to be right now the fastest growing participatory sport in the country, right? I mean, that seems pretty clear. What happened? I mean, first of all, how did it start and where did all this growth come from? It can't just be because you're the CEO.
It has nothing to do with me being the CEO. Okay. And the fact that you hadn't heard of pickleball until we spoke means you need to get out more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, spend less time in supermarkets and more time doing other things. I'm with
exactly. The sport's been around since 1965, and it was invented by some families on Bainbridge Island, Washington, outside of Seattle. It's a vacation area. They were there when the kids were bored, and they kind of created this game by taking an old wiffle ball, a badminton net, and some wood paddles that they made. So it was definitely kind of regional for a long time. It became popular with seniors in the Sun Belt in particular over that next 15, 20 years, because it's a great sport for seniors to play because you're moving and you're active, but you don't have to run as much like you do in tennis. Right. But it's really just been in the past 5 years that the trajectory has really gone like this.
I'd say that's why I've never heard it, had never heard of it, because while I'm old, I don't hang out with seniors. That's going to be my excuse.
Okay, we'll go with that for now.
So it migrated to the South and senior citizens, and now I guess baby boomers who are also becoming senior citizens are adopting it.
Well, now everybody is adopting, and that's the beauty of it, which bodes well for the sport. Yeah, and so it definitely was. It was West Coast, Arizona, Texas, Florida. The Villages down in Florida was a huge pioneer in pickleball facilities and events and tournaments back in the 70s and 80s. But now it's become, as I said, the past 5 years, it's caught on. COVID helped, like it did many outdoor sports where you could be outside, play, and be socially distanced. But even before COVID, the trajectory was crazy. And we had, in the sport, there were 3.7 million people who played, 3.2 million people who played in 2019, and that increased to 4.3 million in 2020. And the next numbers won't be available, obviously, for a couple of months, but we're assuming there are probably about 5 million people who play. And this is someone who plays once a year in their driveway.
Right.
to what we call a core user, someone who plays more than 7 times a year and probably plays in a park or at a club or at a league or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was extraordinary. In addition to having, I mean, they're in the town where we both live. They're converting tennis courts to pickleball courts, so there's enormous usage there. But then there's also, one of my neighbors has the flattest driveway on the street, and he converted his driveway to a pickleball court.
Yep.
I mean, did it temporarily, and he said, "I like this enough. I'm going to paint the lines, so I'm going to make it permanent." And that's, to me, that's extraordinary. At what point does the sport go from being something that a bunch of people invented because to keep their kids entertained to something that requires an organization? What is that? When does that happen?
When the sport becomes popular enough that there's real competition, that there's organized competition. And that's really how we were created, USA Pickleball, as the national governing body of the sport, to set the rules, to approve certified equipment and paddles and balls, making sure they're within specification, to run or sanction tournaments. So it's really the whole concept of the NGB, national governing body, bringing some formality and structure to the sport. Because now we have 52,000 members of USA Pickleball. We had 37,000 members on January 1st.
Okay.
So those people, our members, tend to be ones who play more competitively. They play in sanctioned tournaments. We provide people with a rating, as in tennis. So you could be a 3.0, 3.5, or so on, which you need to play in tournaments. And we set the rules and we do all of that. So that's all well and good, and that's an important role that we play, but our mission is to grow the sport. And when you get a sport like pickleball that is taking off, you have a lot of different people and organizations that want to get involved, which is great, but you can't let it be the wild, wild west out there. And at some point, you need a central organization like USA Pickleball to say, all right, here's how we're all going to work together to keep this thing going.
Right. How many tournaments are there? I mean, compared to, it's obviously not as big as tennis in terms of tournaments, but how, are there a significant number of tournaments that take place around the country during the year?
Oh, there are hundreds of tournaments, and some are small. Some might be 200 people playing over a weekend, all the way to our national championships. The USA Pickleball National Championships, they're the Indian Wells Tennis Garden. And we will have close to 2,500 people come to play in those championships in December.
And how many people and spectators?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thousands. Not as big as the BNP Paribas Open at Indian Wells, but right. we'll have a few thousand people coming in every day to watch.
So when you say your main goal is to grow it, how do you do that? I'm just asking the obvious question because I don't know, how do you grow a sport?
Our strategy, and it should be everybody's strategy, is to make it as inclusive as you can. Again, our membership tends to be the more competitive player. So we have 52,000 members, 4.2 million play the game. So we're missing a lot of people who aren't necessarily part of our organization or associated with us. And so to grow the sport, you create youth programs. You get pickleball programs into parks and recs, into schools, PE classes. You create youth tournaments. You create recreational leagues and clubs. You work with organizations who want to build pickleball courts or pickleball facilities. You give them resources to do that. So one of our biggest challenges is the number of people who are playing is outpacing the number of courts available in the country. So we have a new effort and we get tons of inquiries about, hey, I want to build a pickleball facility, or I want to build a court in my town park, or convert a tennis court or tennis courts. And people don't necessarily know how to do that. So we can point them in the direction to work with other manufacturers to kind of make that happen.
I mean, how severe is the shortage of courts?
It's not severe, and it's tough to gauge, but if you have someone who wants to play pickleball on your town court on a Saturday morning, and he or she has to wait in line a couple hours,
right,
that's going to turn them off from the game pretty quickly.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's starting to happen.
Yeah, my sister lives in Pennsylvania, and she belongs to a group of people, and it's like, I think they like 20 people show up and basically take over the courts on Saturday and Sunday mornings, and then they just rotate through. But the only way to do it is to get there like at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, before anybody else is there. Are we at some point going to see an Olympic pickleball team? I mean, is it growing to that extent?
It is growing to that extent in the US, but not around the world yet. And to be a viable candidate as a Summer Olympic sport, you really need a strong international federation with a lot of countries that also have sports federations that play pickleball. And we're not there yet. There's an organization called the International Federation of Pickleball, and they have about 65 member countries, which is a good start. But a lot of those member countries might be a club in a country, not a real sports federation. So we need to get that international federation stronger and recognized by the International Olympic Committee to then be a candidate for an Olympic sport.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're 10, 12 years away. Yeah, could there be a chance that we could be some sort of a demonstration sport in LA? Perhaps, but it's a long shot.
Yeah. It also strikes me as that one of the advantages of pickleball, it seems like it can be a relatively inexpensive sport to play, right? I mean, you can spend a lot of money on paddles, not rackets. It's a paddle.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to. I mean, so it seems like, and it's not like you have to wear special equipment or sneaker or whatever, right? You can wear a pair of jeans or a pair of shorts and a pair of sneakers and you're done. Is that I would also imagine that when you talk about being inclusive, that's got to be part of the appeal as well, is that you could put pickleball courts into, if there's an inner city school that would like to develop, wants to give the kids a game to play, it's not an expensive kind of commitment.
So very much so. There you can buy portable nets, which are pretty cheap, and you can put them up in your driveway or put them up in a park, take them down. Equipment, a paddle can be from $50 to close to $200. But yeah, you don't need $1,000 golf bag and clubs. Right. You don't need a $500 tennis racket. So that inclusiveness is certainly, I think, the price point, but it's a relatively easy sport to learn.
Yeah.
As I tell people, if you have any athletic ability or played some racket or paddle sport, you can get out there in an hour and a half and not embarrass yourself.
Right.
And that's important. You don't have to take hours of lessons. Now, when you get to be a professional and when you get to the higher levels of competition, the skill is it's very high skill to be really good. But it's so nice when you can get out there, hack around a little bit, and people invite you to come play. It's a very social sport, which is perfect, I think, for today. You'll go out there and have a good time. And then for some reason, and I don't know if anybody can explain why, people get hooked. You rarely have someone say, I play pickleball. They usually say, I'm addicted to pickleball. Right. Or pickleball is all I do. And that's a beautiful thing from our perspective.
Is it seasonal in the sense that I'm trying, but now this is relatively new to my household, and I'll be honest, I haven't played yet. So Laura's gone out with her sister and our kids and stuff like. I just haven't, I have a paddle. I just haven't had time to go out and play. Is it a seasonal thing? Is it, in other words, will it shut down pretty much in the Northeast, or are people going to start building indoor pickleball facilities? Is that all part of the momentum?
Yeah, it's seasonal, but it tends to move indoors.
Right.
Now, and it depends on the part of the country. So in the South, it's obviously a winter, spring sport. You don't want to be playing pickleball in Florida in July if you can avoid it.
Right.
People do, but it's limited in terms of the time of the day you want to play. Where we're up here in the Northeast, it's more of a summer sport, but there are also now indoor facilities, as you said. So a lot of indoor tennis facilities are adding pickleball courts, so you can still play year round. No doubt about that.
The one of the things I remember early goes when I see after I wouldn't have paid any attention to it if not for you taking the job, and then I was seeing stories about how in some communities actually there's a little bit of resistance to it, like in some senior citizen facilities they don't like it because they feel it's too loud, right? And I think they were talking about trying to develop a technology to make it less so. Is that, to what degree do you get involved with that kind of stuff?
Quite a bit. Our whole equipment specifications team is working on that with different manufacturers. And there are two things. You can put up sound barriers around the courts. There's a company that's a sponsor of ours called Acoustablock that does that. So that's part of it. You can quiet down the noise, or you can kind of control it to the court or the facility itself. But there now is research going on how to actually make the paddle quieter. And it's the paddle that creates the noise more so than the ball.
Although it's the hitting of the,
it's the hitting, but it's the paddle that's making the noise, not the ball.
So in terms of like your career, and this might be the conversation you and I would have when we were having a beer, right? But are there, well, and as I've explained to the audience, you have been working in one way, shape, or form in sports marketing, to use probably a too simplistic a term, for virtually your entire career. And I'm curious if there are there lessons? You were at baseball, you were at bowling, tennis, Skip Barber, and now pickleball. Is there a commonality that you find that you find yourself working on problems at pickleball where you say, oh yeah, this is like that problem I dealt with at Major League Baseball 30 years ago, or something like that?
Yeah, there's certainly some commonalities from job to job. The one thing that's been interesting is the business challenge of just about every position I've had has been different. Where at Skip Barber Racing School, it was a company coming out of bankruptcy, new investors, great brand, just had to fix the business model.
Right.
And the International Tennis Hall of Fame up in Newport, Rhode Island, a great institution, kind of a sleepy organization that had a new CEO come in, and with a vision of we're the International Tennis Hall of Fame, not the Newport, Rhode Island Tennis Hall of Fame. So how do we make this a global institution, which it is, understanding that most people don't know it exists, let alone are they going to come to Newport. So what do? We go to them. We become digital.
Right.
I would say with bowling, it's very similar to pickleball in that it's a bowling with a declining sport. So we had to fix that. We had to fix our financials and our infrastructure within the United States Bowling Congress. But it's still a sport with a lot of players and a lot of people at the local level, whether they be regions or sections or state associations, who you need. You need the people of the field. You need the boots on the ground to help promote the sport, because you can come up with programs and policies and procedures at the national level, but they'll never filter down to the local level unless you have people who are going to be ambassadors for you. And that's a key part of what we're doing at pickleball. Is we have about 2,000 volunteers who are local ambassadors to help us promote the sport and grow the game, that's all good. But how do we keep them engaged and how do we keep them motivated? Very similar to what we had in bowling.
And that's interesting because and when I write about retailing, and one of the things that great retailer does is turn your customers into your ambassadors, right? If you're doing a good job, you don't have to sell the experience because your customers are out there selling it for you. And so that's essentially, it sounds like, what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there are probably two themes, if I think about it, that have been consistent throughout these senior sports positions I've had. Every organization that I've gone into, we've had to break down silos, whether it was United States Bowling Congress, which was at that point 150 people, to USA Pickleball, where we have 17.
Wow.
So many people were focused on doing their job and not worrying about anything else, not communicating, not seeing the big picture, not understanding strategy or being part of strategy. So that's been consistent. So that's something we've always had to fix. And the other thing that's kind of interesting and consistent is you can create great programs or have great products, but if you don't get out there and sell it and tell people about it and convince them to engage, you're not going to go anywhere.
Talk a little bit about what you did at Major League Baseball, because you talked about everything else, but you didn't talk about that. And that was sort of interesting because you were there at the time when you created Fan Fest and stuff like that. So talk a little bit about that sort of outreach, which is essentially what it was.
Yeah, and essentially that was a startup. My role there was vice president of business development, which for Major League Baseball Properties, which was the licensing and sponsorship arm of the commissioner's office. And there was this one concept called All-Star Fan Fest, which was going to be, at that point, sort of a card show, something to do at the All-Star game leading up to the game itself. Because when the All-Star game would go into a city, the game's on Tuesday, you would have the home run derby and things like that Monday, but there's tons of people in town with nothing to do over the weekend. And a lot of people, locals especially, who are huge baseball fans, but can't get a ticket to the game. So we created this, what evolved into a theme park of baseball, and it was great. We had a terrific team of creative people. So what was going to be a tiny little card show at a convention center grew into a theme park of baseball with 20 attractions and sponsors and at least 100,000 square feet of space. And we'd have 100,000 people show up over 5 days. So that was an example of kind of creating something from scratch, but taking all the assets that Major League Baseball and the All-Star Game brand had to create something special. But again, it was taking it down to the local fan, who often kind of felt out of the All-Star experience because it was in their town, but they couldn't be a part of it.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Because I do think that, of all those sports we've just talked about, baseball is clearly the largest, right? And so, but like any organization, when you get to a certain size, you can forget about the customer, right? And so, that would be sort of my criticism of baseball sometimes, is that they forget about the fans. They're so busy worrying about other stuff that they're not focusing on the fan experience. Although I do think ballparks have gotten better about that, right? They've sort of become more like minor league ballparks in some ways, in terms of offering lots of different pieces of the experience that are going to be different for different kinds of people.
Well, it's very true. And when we started, the first year of All-Star Fan Fest was Toronto in 1991.
Right.
And if you recall, that was Sky Dome,
right,
which in itself was a huge attraction. Retractable roof. The Blue Jays were hot. They were, I think, the first team to draw 4 million fans in a year. So it was the place to be. Then a couple years later was when Camden Yards opened, and All-Star Fan Fest was there along with the All-Star Game, and that just took it all to a whole new level because of the ballpark being right downtown and everything that I've been.
I was there. I was there that.
Okay, and as of you, And I ranked them all.
Right.
And Camden Yards is still top 5 because
Right.
they were the first folks to figure that out. The downtown retro ballpark with all the modern amenities. And guess what? Fans love that and keep going.
Well, and to this day, I mean, you could probably argue that Camden Yards is a better draw than the Orioles.
Oh, yeah.
It's, going to the
Yeah.
ballpark's a great experience. The team sucks, but the
Yeah.
ballpark itself is, So you've been really generous with your time. I want a couple of quick last questions. First of all, so 20 years ago, and I should know this, but I can't. I'm not as familiar with your timeline as you are. So 20 years ago,
you should be.
I know. I apologize. So 20 years ago, end of 2001. Where were you then?
I was at a company called Venue 3D, which is a joint venture between the Mills Corporation, the big mall retailer,
Oh, right. Okay.
and William Morris Agency to do consulting and projects for malls like the Rouse Company and so I did that for a couple of years, but I was on my way to Skip Barber
Right.
at the time.
Bet you're glad you got out of the mall business.
Yeah.
What a great place to be.
But it was an interesting concept because the company was there to find alternate sources of revenue for these properties other than just rent. So sponsorship,
Right.
Entertainment activities, things that draw more people in and generate revenue. And we had some interesting projects going on.
Well, and maybe they should have stuck with it because to a greater degree, or more people in the mall business should have done that because that's been the problem, right?
Yep.
That once the stores start falling by the wayside, and suddenly you've got these mausoleums that are sitting on the road.
And then and the Mills Corporation, I kind of pioneered that whole thing. I think they called it shoppertainment. And as an example, they did a naming rights. They did a new mall down outside Atlanta. And called it and sold the rights to Discover Card. So it was called Discover Mills, as opposed to Atlanta Mills or whatever.
Huh.
Pretty creative stuff.
So how is the way you think about so the thing about the world has changed since 2001? I mean, among other things, we didn't even have smartphones then. I mean, smartphones started to come in around 2007. So how is the way you think about innovation changed in that time?
The way I think about it.
Do you think of I mean, how do you think about innovation and being innovative at the companies where you are?
Well, I go back, I kind of look at it a little differently. I kind of look at innovation in the whole sports and entertainment world. And it's all technology, right. Let's face it. The fact that you're buying a ticket on your phone and you're scanning that ticket on your phone when you go into the arena or the stadium, and the ability for the property owner to collect data and communicate with the fans, that's massive.
Right.
So it's data and technology. Gosh, the fact that people when they would join the United States Bowling Congress, would write us a check and send it in. Maybe if they were really advanced, they would put it on their credit card, but it wouldn't be done online or anything like that.
I did a story a couple months ago about the Worcester Red Sox and their new ballpark up there, and they've installed an Amazon Go style store where there's no checkout, right? You walk in, you pick it up, you walk out. And one of the things that allows them, in addition to not creating lines, you miss the home run that you got. Why I can't believe I missed it. But it also gives them access to data that they never would have gotten if you were to walk in and buy a hot dog and a beer and walk out and pay cash, or even use your credit card. They're not using that data to any degree, but to be able to get a lot more data to drill down on it and then be able to market to people, not just during the season, but during the off season, because they know what they're buying is a huge opportunity.
No doubt about it. No doubt.
So last question. So during the past 18, 20 months, we've all spent a lot more time watching TV than we did before, right? We've all binged, we've streaming. I mean, it just changed everything. So what did you get addicted to over the past 20 months? What shows and why?
Well, no brainer. Ted Lasso. Come on.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Of all of them. And you know, Kate and I, we've watched them all from Succession and Queen's Gambit and on and on and on. But if you have to pick a clear winner in our book, Ted Lasso, perfect for the times. It was funny, upbeat, positive message, shorter with a half-hour show, not an hour.
That's like huge. So does it bother you? I'm curious because it bothers me. I got so used to binging and streaming is that it bothers me when they release them in a traditional way. It's like, no, give me the whole thing. I want.
When season 2 of Ted Lasso, you know, what the heck? I have to wait a week for the next episode? Forget it. I want it now.
It's really, it's interesting how that's become annoying. And although a lot of those networks are going back to the weekly drop, because they can kind of stretch it out longer, right? They can bring you back for other things, and it's fascinating. I think they sort of bit themselves in the foot there because they just they created these habits that now they've got to fulfill. But I'm totally with you on Ted Lasso. Well, listen, I promise you, I'm going to go out and I'm going to learn to play pickleball. You know,
if you need some assistance, I know a guy. Come on.
Well, maybe you and your wife need to go out and play with me and my wife, and then we'll go have a drink or dinner or something.
That's a concept.
There you go. Sounds good. Stu, thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it. I think it's interesting when you talk about bowling. You know, there's a sport that probably appealed to people who were aging in a lot of ways, but it was also a sport that was aging. And the great advantage of pickleball, while it may appeal to people who are aging, the sport itself is not. I mean, it's brand new in so many ways.
Yep.
So the sky's the limit. So anyway, thanks so much. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Kevin. I enjoyed it.